Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my week number 6 wide receiver start or sit decisions for every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football. But before we get on into things, it is important to note that there are multiple teams on bye in week number 6. So if you got those players in your lineup, you want to make sure you get them out. The Kansas City Chiefs, the Los Angeles Rams, the Miami Dolphins, and the Minnesota Vikings. But before we can also get on into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do want to join today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 6 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with the first matchup of the week, Thursday Night Football, the San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks. Now, in this game for the 49ers, I'm going to be starting both Brandon Ayuk as well as Deebo Samuel. So after we decided to give Brandon Ayuk the silent treatment last week and banish him to our benches, the man proceeded to go off up against the Arizona Cardinals, which is exactly what we planned to do. We decided, hey, you know what? We're tired of Brandon Ayuk's antics. We're going to bench him. We're going to let him know that we mean business, that he can't just not perform in our starting lineup. And now that he ended up having that solid game as the wide receiver 10 with 8 receptions on 12 targets up against the Cardinals for 147 yards, we are going to now be able to continue to rank him inside of the top 24 at the wide receiver position. Now, I am hesitant to truly give him the Gawk Gawk 9000 special, as it was just one game, right? One game doesn't necessarily make up for multiple other games where he was absolutely bending us over a table. But I do believe this week up against the Seattle Seahawks in a game that could be very high scoring, a back and forth affair, that Brandon Ayuk does belong inside of the low end wide receiver 1 tier. For Deebo Samuel, despite Brandon Ayuk having the huge game and Deebo having a grand total of 3 fantasy points, I honestly still do feel confident in Deebo Samuel going forward. There is an argument to be made between Deebo and Ayuk in terms of where you want to rank them, but I got them both in a similar tier, the low-end wide receiver 1 range that could both end up falling into the high-end wide receiver 2 range, depending how my rankings end up playing out. For Jauan Jennings with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, as well as George Kittle playing, the floor of Jauan Jennings has now entered into the basement, as the targets have been far and few in between. Now, every once in a while, Jauan's going to pop off and have a big game because the 49ers offense in any given game could lay the pipe, right? They could score 30 plus points, and that could lead to Jauan Jennings having a great game, but ultimately the floor is far too low for you to justify playing him. For the Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf did have a fumble last week up against the Giants, which led to a touchdown for the Giants, which hurt like a butt cheek on a stick if you're a Seahawks fan, or if you had DK Metcalf in fantasy. His production has calmed down ever so slightly recently, but I don't think we should really worry too much about that. I think he's going to hop back on the saddle this week, Micah Bell style, and end up being a low-end wide receiver 1 this week, which he was in the first 3 games of the season. In weeks 2 and 3, he was that week 1 not as hot. For Tyler Lockett in my pocket skirt, he is the definition of a business decision. The guy catches the ball, and even if there is a straight shot into the end zone, even if there is no one within 30 yards of him, he's going to just press X on the PlayStation controller, do a conservative catch, and not try to run into the end zone, right? It is so funny. It happens all of the time because he doesn't want to get hurt, and I fully understand that. But if he's not willing to put his body on the line and try to run into the end zone, then what really is the point in playing him? Because it's not like he is some red zone dominator. It's not like he's going to see a gazillion targets. So even with him him seeing enough targets to, if he didn't lay down after catching the pass, he would be start worthy. His upside is essentially like 13 fantasy points, so I'm not going to be starting him. Jackson Smith-Njigba's targets have been solid in back-to-back games with 7 or more in both games, and he ended up scoring a touchdown last week. The upside is somewhat limited by the fact that Geno Smith absolutely loves Tyler Lockett, but he is pretty safe to get you 12 to 15 points with the upside of obviously having a huge game. So I definitely think you should be starting Jackson Smith-Njigba in the mid-range wide receiver 3/flex range. Next up, we move to London with the London Jaguars at the Chicago Bears. Now, wiki, DJ Moore has ascended into potential fantasy football superstardom. Now, last season, he was putting up huge numbies with Tyler Bagent, or Tyson Bagent, his name was, and Justin Fields. But this year, it was a little bit of a slow roll, right? Him and Caleb weren't necessarily on the same page, but last week up against the Panthers, DJ Moore went bananas. Wide receiver 6 with 5 receptions on 8 targets for 105 yards and not 1 but 2 touchdowns in that game. And with Caleb and him now being on the same page, I really do believe that DJ Moore should be at least flirting with being inside the top 12 conversation, especially up against a Jaguars defense that would get bossed by me. So I like DJ Moore as a top 8 option on the week. For the other Chicago Bears, things aren't as great, right? Keenan and Rome Odunze both saw 6 targets each last week, and neither ended up having a great showing. I do think that this matchup could lead to either or maybe even both guys ending up in the end zone or even ripping off like an 80 plus, 100 plus yard performance. But with DJ Moore clearly being the guy, and with the others picking up the scraps, I won't be playing either until we have a better idea of which one is going to be seeing more targets weekly, and frankly, that might not end up even happening this season. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. has been a top 10 wide receiver in back-to-back games, and at this point, we as a fantasy community need to put a whole lot more respect on Brian Thomas Jr.'s name. Now, I did suck BTJ dry all summer, so I don't want to do a straight up victory lap here, but I am victory lapping a bit, right? Brian Thomas Jr. has been nothing short of an absolute fantastic pick based upon where you got him, and I do believe that he has the upside to be a great wide receiver all year long. Now, the problem with Brian Thomas Jr. and the problem with fully giving him the Hawk Tua special here is that the Bears defense is legit. So, even with BTJ playing as good as he is, I would be hesitant to throw him inside of the top 24. He is a high upside wide receiver 3 for me. To me, and everyone with a pair of eyes, or even if you don't have both eyes, you got one, like Mike Wazowski or Patchy the fucking Pirate, you should be able to see that Christian Kirk isn't as good as BTJ. But we do still see that Trevor Lawrence likes to feed Christian Kirk every once in a while, and he has had 2 games with over 10 targets this season. While BTJ is clearly the safer option of the two, and he should be ranked ahead of Christian Kirk, I do believe that Christian Kirk is a fringe start-worthy guy. In better matchups than this, he would be ranked higher, though. Gabe Davis, if you still have that man on your team, I would be surprised if you are able to lace up your shoes correctly, and you're not just rocking some light-up fucking Lightning McQueen Skechers, so there's really no reason to play him, and there's no reason to waste your time talking about him. Next up, we move into the real Sunday slate here, because that game was at 9:30 a.m. Ain't nobody got time for that, even though I will be up watching that, and if you're on the West Coast, brutal, as it's like 6:30 a.m. Someone said they're in Hawaii in the comment section, and the game is even earlier than that. Just sleep through it. Don't even bother waking up. So we got the Arizona Cardinals at the Green Bay Packers. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. has seen a healthy dosage of targets weekly ever since week 1, where Kyler just didn't look for him at all, and he was wide open for the game-winning touchdown against the Bills, but Kyler did not end up seeing him. Even with the high amount of targets, though, for Marv, he hasn't really found that consistency, and he's been really spotty. The upside is very evident. The skill is very evident with Marvin Harrison Jr., but the safety is just not really there. When push comes to shove, Marvin Harrison Jr. should be ranked inside of the top 12 up against the Packers defense that really doesn't look all that great. I do expect one of the better showings this week. If Kyler Murray can lock in here, I really do think Marv could end up being even the top 5 or even the number 1 wide receiver on the week. But again, he has been a lot more up and down than I would have previously thought entering into the year. Michael Wilson does feel to me like he has surpassed Greg Dortch as the clear wide receiver 2 on the team. But with Kyler Murray playing kind of just mid, if I'm being honest with you, I don't really feel confident in playing the wide receiver 2 on a team that has Marvin Harrison Jr., who could suck in targets at the rate of Kirby, and Trey McBride, who gets a bunch of targets, and they also have James Conner, who could also get a bunch of targets. So I would definitely stay away from these ancillary Cardinals offense if weapons like Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson. For Jaden Riley-Reed of the Packers, he didn't drop the hammer down last week up against the Rams like I thought he would. He still ended up having a good game, so if you started him, he didn't completely sink your battleship. He had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 78 yards. Love has a hard-on for feeding the rock to Jaden Reed, so I definitely think a bounce back is coming here on his way to being a top 10 fantasy football wide receiver. For Dontavian John Wicks, it was bad. Now, people are definitely going to be mad at Wicks, and rightfully so, right? The dude didn't even muster up 5 fantasy points. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Laney Wilson, he saw 7 targets last week and had 13 targets the week prior. Even with Romeo Doubs back, I think you should consider Wicks as a fringe start due to how many looks that Jordan Love gives him. Now, last week, the process was correct. We were hunting for targets. He got 7 targets, but sometimes you swing and you miss. Sometimes you swing, the balls are shaken too much coming his way, like you're at a fucking Magic Mike show or a Chip and Dale show. If you go that way, you know, it is what it is. Sometimes you just got to watch that stuff, you know? But what I was saying here is the targets are coming his way. So if he's able to get 7, 8, 9, 10 potential targets, it could swing and go the opposite direction, and he could end up having a huge game. We saw just 2 weeks ago, he was the wide receiver number 3. So without Christian Watson, I still think Wicks is playable, especially up against the Cardinals. Romeo Doubs baby raged last week. He was supposed to play last week, but then the team suspended him for conduct detrimental to the team. He is set to suit up in this week's game, but with Wicks and Reed clearly out-targeting him, and with the resurgence of Luke Musgrave, I really don't believe you should be starting Romeo Doubs. Next up, we move to, this is our Colts, this is our team, we bleed blue, at the Tennessee Titans. Now, when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts, it is as easy as 1, 2, 3 to break this situation down. If Anthony Richardson is out yet again, both Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs will be in that start-worthy range. If Anthony Richardson is to come back, then they both get demoted, not just to sits, must-sits. Because even if the matchup against the Titans is up to your liking, it's up to snuff, with Anthony Richardson under center, the wide receivers are as risky as not rocking a condom when she's in her fertile mode, right? So Pittman, while he is this great wide receiver, while Pittman has put up numbers with multiple different quarterbacks, the safety simply is not there with Anthony Richardson. Again, Pittman should be in the top 24 conversation without Anthony Richardson, as he has been a top 24 wide receiver in back-to-back weeks, and he even scored a touchdown last week for Josh Downs with cool Joe Flacco under center. Downs even outscored Michael Pittman Jr. in back-to-back games as the wide receiver 8 and wide receiver 17, getting peppered with 9 or more targets in both games. The Titans matchup here definitely isn't the best. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the Titans defense is absolute pushovers, but with the production of Joe Flacco, Michael Pittman Jr., and Josh Downs, you want the guys in the lineup. So again, you should be ranking him right next to MPJ, and frankly, I would rank him ahead of Michael Pittman Jr. if Joe Flacco is in. But if AR is in the game, you got to run fast. like Rickon Stark. For the Tennessee Titans, it is simple as well. Simple arithmetic, but we can't get to the Titans because we forgot to talk about my boy Alec Pierce, who just plays the game the right way. He's the first guy in, last guy out type of wide receiver, real hard worker, and he was rewarded for his hard work with 3 receptions on 3 targets for 134 yards and a tug in Jacksonville. But with the targets being so far and few in between, even if Flacco is in, I would not start him. Before we talk about the Titans wide receivers, though, and the rest of the wide receivers going in the week 6 number slate, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our partner over at Underdog. Now, if you're new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious, you'll be able to claim your free pick, which this week is Brock Purdy, higher than half a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So if you are new to Underdog, you sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you will get the free pick, which this week is Brock Purdy higher than half a total yard. You match that with one of the players on the Seahawks or any of the players playing on Sunday or Monday, and if both of your picks hit, you receive 3 times what you enter into your pick'em. If you decide to do, hey, I want to do 3 picks, 4 picks, 5 picks, then the payout will be higher. Again, claim your free pick using promo code Notorious plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash, promo code Notorious, or click on the link in the video description. So back on into game number 4 here, the Colts versus the Titans. When it comes to the Titans, I just don't want to start any of these guys, regardless on if it's Mason Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, or Mayo Man Will Levis, even against a Colts defense that wouldn't be able to stop the Rizzler himself from running routes. I have zero confidence in Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins. Now, one of them could easily go off because the Indianapolis Colts defense is bottom of the barrel. And if I had to bet on it being one or the other, I probably would lean with it being on Hopkins. But I feel like the Titans are just going to run the ball gently down the stream to win this game. And that's going to end up with the pass attack being limited and neither guy being startable. Same thing goes for Tyler. Yeah, Boyd. Next up, we move to the Houston Texans at the New England Patriots. The Patriots decided to shake things up and make a change at the quarterback position. We no longer have to watch Drake May's former starting quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, play quarterback. We get Drake May season. Now, both Douglas and Jalen Polk have looked good at points this season, but even with Drake May becoming the starter, I would like to see how he plays before I go out there fucking swinging my cock around like Indiana Jones and saying, oh, you got to start Douglas, you got to start Jalen Polk, because while I love the talent of both of these players, I need to see Drake May feed them the rock before I get confident in telling you to start any of them. So DeMario Douglas, DeMario time, Jalen Polk, and Kendrick Bourne are all sits. For the Texans, without Nico Collins, Diggs is the clear heir to the throne here as the wide receiver 1. 3 straight games with 8 or more targets, and he feels like a very safe bet weekly to finish as a top 24 wide receivers. Now, without Nico, he will see a strong bump up as a high-end wide receiver 2, and by the end of the week, I might end up convincing myself to rank him inside of the top 12. Also, important to note, this was in the news, Stephon Diggs allegedly smashed Cardi B, which is interesting, but I do think it's insane that Cardi B had an affair on her husband, I think it's Offset, one of the Migos, while she was 8 months pregnant. Now, my fiance is not pregnant, not yet, of course, right? When the Dolphins win the Super Bowl, baby Tua will be coming back a couple of months later, of course, but I don't know if I would want to be sticking my wee-wee into the hoo-ha of a lady that is 8 months pregnant that you're not with. That's just me, though. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe you guys enjoy that. You know, I'm not going to judge. I kind of did judge, but we're not going to talk about that too much because, again, it's unimportant. It's just very funny because there's an old video of Stephon Diggs talking about how much he loves Cardi B. So Hank Dell of the Texans is buried like the Undertaker in expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros. You have to scroll down for like an hour to find him. But due to his upside alone, with Nico Collins out, it moves him up into the fringe upside start range. He has yet to have close to a top 32 finish on the season, and if there ever was a time for it to happen, the time is up, the time is now. It would be right now without Nico Collins. I got Tank Dell in the fringe starter wide receiver 3 range. Xavier Hutchinson, while I wouldn't be shocked if he had a decent game, but with Dell and Diggs clearly above him in the wide receiver hierarchy, I think it would be foolish to start him. Next up, we move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. Now, for Chris Godwin, if what happens to Evans up against the Saints normally happens to Evans happens here, then Godwin could be in for a huge showing. Now, he has dipped in terms of production since his first 2 games of the season where he ripped off top 8 performances, though he has had 8 or more targets in 4 or 5 games, so I'm not really worried at all about Godwin. Baker Mayfield is looking very nice, so I think you should continue to start Godwin as a low-end wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2. Now, when it comes to Mike Evans, with it being just a normal UFC fight night on Saturday, right, we don't get another Alex Poatan-Pajeda card, right, we don't got a Conor McGregor fight, we don't got Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, we don't got Ilya Topuria, Volk, we don't got any of those guys, we don't got John Bones Jones, we got just a normal UFC fight night. So you know what? The best fight that might happen this weekend might be Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore, a belt as old as time. Evans notoriously struggles against the New Orleans Saints. If there ever was a year for him to shake it off, and have a good game, it would be this season because Baker is playing out of his mind. Evans is playing super well, top 10 receiver in 3 of 5 games. But I will be very, 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 very to the 90th power cautious this week, as Evans could easily score like 4 fucking fantasy points or get ejected on the first play of the game. So he's going to be ranked as wide receiver 2 this week instead of the normal wide receiver 1 due to the matchup. Sterling Shepard or Jalen McMillan or whoever's the wide receiver 3, sit him down. For the Saints, this might sound crazy. It might sound insane to start Shaheed and not start Olave, but I'm going to keep it very, very simple. Even without Derek Carr, Shaheed just needs one deep ball to connect. You know they're going to draw it up for him to have fantasy football value. Whereas Olave isn't the deep threat guy. He needs to be taking balls to the face like his name was Lena the Plug. So, in my opinion, Shaheed is very risky. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, Shaheed is a really, really great start this week. He's risky, but he's a high upside wide receiver 3/flex option. Without Carr, for multiple weeks, Chris Olave's value has been hit in the face with a metaphorical baseball bat by Hank Aaron. Even if discount Patrick Mahomes, Spencer Rattler gets the start instead of Jake Kearney or whatever the fuck that guy's name is, I would rather just leave Olave on my bench and wait it out and see what happens. London Tipton's brother, Mason Tipton, did end up having a solid catch yesterday, but that doesn't really matter, so you're not going to be starting him. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns at the Philadelphia Eagles. If you guys have enjoyed thus far, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below and leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. So we got the Browns at the Eagles. We'll start off with the Cleveland Browns, and even with Deshaun Watson being dialed in to focusing on Amari Cooper every single game with 8 or more targets in every single game, Cooper has had just 1 game inside of the top 40. It's not like, oh, he hasn't had he's only had 1 game inside of the top 12, right? Then, you know what, if he's like the wide receiver 18 to 24, some weeks he falls to like the wide receiver 30, it would be fine. I wouldn't be sitting here fucking complaining, but it's not been that way. He's only had 1 game inside the top 40, and I get it was a huge game against the Giants as the wide receiver 5. But with Watson throwing the ball, like, if it hits the wide receiver in the hands, his nuts get electrocuted. There is no way you can justify starting him even up against the Birds defense. For Jerry Jeudy, I am really just sick of Deshaun Watson. That's all we're going to talk about. It doesn't matter if Jerry Jeudy was prime Antonio Brown, prime Calvin Johnson, prime fucking Randy Moss, Chad Ochocinco, whoever you want to give the Gawk 9000 special to, whoever you think the best wide receiver ever is, right? Prime Julio Jones. It wouldn't matter because The Deshaun Watson experiment in Cleveland is terrible. I'm just sick of watching it, and I wish they would pull the plug on him. But that's not going to happen because they paid way too much money, so we're just going to have to rock with the lowest of lows of Watson and the smallest of highs. It's not even like there's the highest of highs, right, where he's going crazy. It's just like, oh, they won the game because he didn't turn the ball over a million times. I don't even trust Judy anymore. You got to sit him. If you're not starting Cooper or Judy, you better believe Elijah Moore is a clear sit. For the Eagles, A.J. Brown has only played in one game this season, back in week 1 in Brazil, the BBL Bowl up against the Packers. Due to the hammy injury in that game, though, he was the wide receiver 7, and honestly, with how overrated the Browns defense has been, I expect A.J. Brown to return to form as a top 12 wide receiver. He has been out for 4 weeks at this point, but I believe he'll be fully healthy. I think they kept him out for this long for a reason, to get him back to close to 100%, so I like him in this spot. Devontae Smith has been playing well all season when healthy. Now, his targets did see an uptick without A.J. Brown, so I do expect him to take a little bit of a backpedal in terms of targets. Now, does that mean you can't start him? Of course you could still start him, but I wouldn't rank him in the same range as A.J. Brown. Now, is it impossible for him to outscore A.J. Brown even with less targets? The answer to that is obviously he can outscore A.J. Brown even with less targets, but I don't think you would rank them in the same range. I do think that Devontae Smith's a top 24 option. He's been a top 25 wide receiver every single week that he's played, and I expect that to continue here. He's a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Jahan Dotson, even without Smith and Brown in the last game that they played, Dotson only commanded 4 targets. He is just simply not that guy, pal, so he shouldn't even be rostered. Next up, we move to the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders at the Baltimore Ravens, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Scary Terry has been solid over the last 3 weeks as Jaden Daniels is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and I genuinely believe if the NFL had the balls, the cojones, to give the MVP to the guy who deserves it through the first 5 games, right? Say we eliminate the last ever many fucking games there are left, right? Quick math. In 5 games, 17-game season. 11? 12 games left. 12 games left. That's terrible, right? Nick, are you an idiot? Yeah, I mean, the only numbers I truly understand are football numbers, so it is what it is. Mr. Christie should have failed me in the 5th grade, but it is what it is, right? So, MVP, I really think, right now, would be Jaden Stormy Daniels. But I don't think that'll actually happen because I just don't think they're going to give a rookie the MVP. I'm going to start gawking on Mr. Jaden Daniels, though, and we're going to talk about Terry McLaurin. I think up against Baltimore, we should see McLaurin get loose like O.J. Simpson behind the defense. He should be at minimum a top 24 guy and should be a reliable top 18 performer in a game that could be very high scoring. Now, when it comes to Dyami Brown and Luke McCaffrey, these guys are hitched to an amazing offense, right? We just gave we were massaging the grundle of Jaden Daniels, right? I talked him up. I like Jaden Daniels, and I like this offense. Problem is, neither Luke McCaffrey or Dyami Brown have really taken a leap from one another. Neither of them really command way more than enough targets to actually want to play them, especially since Noah Brown is also involved. Unless one of them magically becomes the clear number 2 wide receiver, there is zero reason to play any wide receiver on the Commanders not named Terry McLaurin. Now, last week for Zay Flowers, we got the game script that I was hoping for. Now, for weeks, Flowers has been kind of down bad. Now, it wasn't because Zay Flowers just magically forgot how to catch the football. It was because the team was up so big that they would just run the ball with Derrick Henry. Why risk Lamar doing something stupid? Why risk a receiver accidentally juggling the ball? It hits off his hands, volleyball style, goes up, Scott Sterling, and they pick it off, right? Why bother doing that, right? So, that game, we didn't really necessarily see the Ravens just dominate. Now, the offense was great, right? The Lamar Jackson played great. Flowers played great. Derrick Henry played great. Rashad Bateman played great. So they did kind of backhand the defense, Rafael Nadal style. but they were still able to throw the ball because they weren't up by a million and they were still in the game with the Cincinnati Bengals. That led to Flowers having 7 receptions on 12 targets for 111 yards and 1 carry for 9 yards. This week, I expect this game to be an old Western shootout, Dutch Vanderlyn style, right? I just need more time, Arthur. So I like this spot for Flowers. I think he's a mid-tier wide receiver too. Now, I'm obviously worried about the fact that there is a chance that the Ravens put the belt to ass here. There's a chance that the Ravens end up dominating, whipping the baby oil out here and having a huge showing, and that leads to Flowers taking the back seat with Henry running a ton. But right now, I do like this spot. The Commanders' offense has been great, so I'm going to rock with Zay Flowers here. Now, Bateman was looking like prime 2010s, early 2010s, Brandy Love last week. He had 4 receptions on 8 targets for 58 yards and a tug. Bateman will do this every once in a while, but this will not fool me, right? I'm not going to be fooled by this. I've seen it before. I know Rashad Bateman. He's going to do this every once in a while, so there's no reason to play Bateman, even up against the Swiss Cheese Commanders defense. Aguilar is the number 3 receiver on a team that uses more tight ends than a Bang Bros production, so you don't want anything to do with Nelson Aguilar. Next up, we move to the Los Angeles Chargers at the Denver Broncos, and to keep things short, you're not starting anyone in this game at the wide receiver position. Now, I think PS2, Patrick Surtain II, will be on either Ladd or Quentin Johnston, and more than likely, in my opinion, Quentin Johnston. But either way, the Broncos defense looks even better than I could have ever imagined. It's really amazing sight to see. Ladd looked good prior to the bye week. He had 5 receptions for 67 yards and a touchdown against the Chiefs. This game, though, reeks of being low scoring, so even if Surtain isn't on Ladd, I just don't really want to start him. Quentin Johnston has also been solid this season and looks very involved in the offense as he finally grew hands to actually catch the football. Again, though, with him potentially getting the Patrick Surtain treatment, and with this game being as unexciting as it gets in terms of offensive production, 2 great defenses, not a lot of offense, I will not be starting Johnston. Joshua Palmer is clearly behind Ladd and QJ, so there's no need to even roster him on a run-heavy team. For the Denver Broncos, Courtland Sutton is clearly the guy, right? It is as clear as day that he's the guy in Denver. And when Bo Nix starts to ascend to a solid level weekly, I think Sutton might be a mighty fine wide receiver 3/flex option. But as of right now, against the solid Chargers defense, it just feels like too much of a risk to play Sutton, especially since Nix could have a disaster class in this spot. Josh Reynolds found the end zone last week on 1 of his 2 targets for 9 yards. If I'm not going to play Courtland Sutton, who gets a lot of targets, then you definitely don't want to play Josh Reynolds or a motherfucker whose name looks like an Xbox gamer tag, Little Jordan Humphrey. Next up, we move to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the, turn your volume down a little bit, the Las Vegas Raiders. George Pickens' targets have been solid with 7 or more in 3 straight games, but he has only had 1 top 24 game to show for it. Fields does look solid, but it's not like he has keyhole accuracy to fit the ball in to Pickens all the time, which does hurt him from being a safe player. Due to the upside against a not-so-hot Raiders defense, I think Pickens is a fine wide receiver 3 week with a chance to pop off up against that defense. For Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson, they're essentially one and the same. They're a couple of targets a week, and if you get lucky, they use their speed to find the end zone, and then they, are like the wide receiver 35. This means, even in good spots against the Raiders, you would be foolish to play either guy who just deserves to be on waivers. Next up, we got Jacoby of the Raiders. Realistically, Jacoby Myers is the clear wide receiver 1 on the Raiders without Devontae Adams. He has had 9 or more targets in 3 straight games, but with the quarterback situation being as untrusty as some discount cocaine, with the Steelers defense looking great, I just wouldn't chance it. But Myers is a good player. Just really the quarterback situation that scares me away, to be honest. Both Trey Tucker and DJ Turner are a few targets a week guys, right? The touchdown upside is there, but with no real knowledge of who the starting quarterback actually is, if it's Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, and it's not like either of them are even better than one another, I just think you should be sitting them. If you had to start one, it would be Jacoby. Next up, we got the Detroit Lions at the Dallas Cowboys. This game should be super exciting. Outside of the week 1 disaster class for Amon-Ra St. Brown, he has been a top 11 wide receiver in 3 straight games. They were on bye last week. He had over 20 PPR points in all of those games. The Lions offense appears to be getting better and better, and coming out the bye week, I do expect them to look ready to slap the Cowboys' overrated defense across the face. I got Amon-Ra St. Brown as a top five wide receiver on the week. J-Mo has been boom or bust through the first 4 games of the season, with his targets fluctuating heavily. In weeks 1 and 2, everything was awesome. Like that Lego movie song, everything is awesome, right? He had 9 or more targets in those games. But then, over the last 2 weeks, he's had just 2 and 3 targets. Now, he's had good games, even with 2 or 3 targets, but facing against the Dallas defense, I do think the upside is there, right? This could be a really high-scoring game. But if he's only going to get like 2 or 3 targets, it's very unreliable, so he's definitely not ranked inside the top 12 or 24. He's a wide receiver 3/flex option for Tim Patrick, the Broncos legend. He'd be lucky to see 3 targets. You got to sit him. For the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb had a down week last week in Pittsburgh as the wide receiver 42 with 5 receptions on 9 targets for 62 yards and 1 carry for 2 yards. While the season has been far from ideal for Lamb, still been solid, right? If there ever was a spot for him to really have that huge game, though, it would be this week up against the Lions in a game that could be very back and forth. I expect Lamb to play far better, and we'll have him ranked inside of the top 5 on the week. I view Jalen Tolbert very much in the same light that I view Jameson Williams, meaning that he is very hit or miss weekly due to his targets fluctuating so heavily. Last week, he had 7 receptions on 10 targets against the Steelers. He had 87 yards and the game-winning touchdown. Tolbert is a very solid player, and without Cooks, his targets should be safe. But they have Turpin. I know, Turpin's not that good. They have Jake Ferguson. They have Rico Dowdle who can catch passes. So again, it's not like I'm going to guarantee a lot of targets for Tolbert, so he's a fine wide receiver 3/flex range. I would argue, though, that based on what we've seen recently, Tolbert might be a little bit safer than Jameson Williams. Turpin's involvement has me a bit confused about Tolbert, though, because Turpin did have 4 receptions on 5 targets for 50 yards, but he's like the 4th best option on the team, so no real need to actually play him in fantasy. He might just end up cucking Jalen Tolbert a little bit. Next up, we got the final game before Sunday Night Football, the Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Drizzy Drake London did get banged up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Thursday Night Football in his big day. Huge for Drake London. 12 receptions on 13 targets for 151 yards and a touchdown. I haven't seen anything regarding the health of London just yet, so that's kind of suspect. But also, I feel like if he was severely hurt, we would know more. So, just kind of up in the air right now. I'm assuming that he does play. And if he does, he's going to hit the Panthers with the 5-knuckle shuffle as a solid bet to finish inside of the top 12. And at minimum, he should be a very reliable wide receiver, too. Now, Darnell, here comes the Mooney. Not only did Drake London go crazy, Darnell Mooney and Drake London formed an Eiffel Tower over the Bucs defense. Mooney had 9 receptions on 16 targets for 105 yards and not 1, but 2 touchdowns in that game as the wide receiver numero tres, the wide receiver 3. While I don't think he's going to pop off like that again this week, it is possible up against the Panthers, and I believe he should be a reliable bet as a low-end wide receiver 2 to a high-end wide receiver 3. Like if we're comparing him to Jameson Williams and Mr. Tolbert, he is just way safer than that, so he is a little bit higher up on the pedestal. Ray McLeod has seen 7 targets in back-to-back games, which is really fucking annoying if you're a Kyle Pitts owner, and really annoying if you're a Bijan owner, because why is the ball not going to Bijan? Even if Pitts had a good game last week, Ray was the wide receiver 34 with 6 receptions for 66 yards. He is a solid player, but with too many cooks in the kitchen, you really don't want to be starting him at all. But I wouldn't be shocked if he had a decent game. I also wouldn't be shocked if he had like 2 fantasy points. For the Panthers, Deontay Johnson, after looking like the prime version of himself on the Steelers with Big Ben throwing him the rock, 2 straight games with Dalton. It was looking good, dude. It really was. But then Deontay Johnson went back to looking how he looked with Bryce Young, because up against Chicago, he had 3 receptions on 6 targets for 23 yards in a game that Xavier Legette exited early. I strongly do believe more in this matchup, though. The matchup against Chicago was definitely tough, and I don't think that's as much of a stain on Deontay Johnson. I think his season isn't going down the drain here. While the Falcons defense is a complete trash, we just saw the Bucs bend him over a table, so this could be a high-scoring game. I expect Johnson to bounce back as a mid-range to high-range wide receiver 2. For the rest of the guys, Xavier, somebody touching my Legette, missed a bunch of last week's game with the shoulder injury, only having 1 reception. This week, if he's good to go, which is my assumption, he's close to a start, but I am going to leave him on the bench for now. Jonathan Mingo just isn't very good, so even if Legette misses, I would not be playing him. Now we move to, "Cause you waited all day for Sunday night." Joe Burrow and the Bengals versus Daniel Jones and the Giants in MetLife in New Jersey. Ja'Marr Chase had his best game of the season last week against the Ravens, dropping a 40 bomb in PPR with 10 receptions on 12 targets for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. He has really picked things up over the last 3 weeks, and while the Giants' defense is definitely underrated, you could tell that, Geno Smith will tell you that, I do expect Ja'Marr to take them to the slaughterhouse as a top 5 wide receiver. T. Higgins, just like Ja'Marr Chase, had the Ravens' defense in the figure 4 as the wide receiver 4 with 9 receptions on 14 targets for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. Higgins has now had back-to-back games with 10 or more targets, and this game has sneaky high-scoring upside due to how the Giants' offense looks pretty solid, and the Bengals defense is just really ass, so I do expect a high dosage of Higgins again this week, and he should be a middling wide receiver 2 in that wide receiver 16 to 20 range on the week. Andre Yoshi-Vash, with the true emergence of T. Higgins, Yoshi-Vash's targets have dipped, dived, and ducked like he was in the Dodgeball movie, with just 3 total targets over the last 2 weeks. No reason to play him, even if the talent is very clearly there. For the Giants, Malik Neighbors missed last week with the concussion that he suffered late in that game up against the Cowboys in primetime in week 4. When Neighbors has been healthy, he has been nothing short of dominant. I'm talking about pink handcuffs here. 3 straight games inside of the top 8, and he has seen 12 or more targets in 3 straight games. Assuming Neighbors clears the concussion protocol, he will be, without a shadow of the doubt, a smash. The Bengals defense is ripe for the taking, and I believe Neighbors finishes as a top 5 receiver on the week. Robinson has been getting fed like Eddie Lacy at a fucking Chinese buffet, though it is somewhat needs to be discussed. Like, while the targets have been there, back-to-back games as a top 18 wide receiver, it is possibly does it again up against the Bengals, but it's also important to note that without Neighbors, you're not really going to see Wan'Dale in the end zone. And Wan'Dale also just is really a target hog. He's a PPR, half PPR merchant, right? Again, he had a great game, right? He had 6 receptions on 9 targets for 36 yards, but again, the yards weren't really there. It was the touchdown. So the volume should persist even with Neighbors coming back, but the upside really isn't all that high. Let's just be honest. He's a safe wide receiver 3/flex option. Darius Slayton had a huge showing in Seattle with 8 receptions on 11 targets for 122 yards and a score. But assuming that Neighbors is back, even in a wet dream matchup like this, you should not be confident at all starting Darius Slayton. Final game here, we got the no one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills at the New York Jumbo Jets. Again, make sure to check out Underdog before we get on out of this video and break this down. Again, use promo code Notorious to claim your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So Jets versus the Bills. What's the talking point here? It's obviously the Jets. How could it not be the Jets, right? If you don't live under a rock, you know that the New York Jumbo Jets have fired. You're fired. Xerxes from 300. Looking motherfucker, Robert Saleh. Saleh out. Their defensive coordinator is now the head coach. And that could bring some juice into the team, but important to note that Nathaniel Hackett is still calling the plays. Garrett Wilson last week saw 22 targets in London against the Vikings. A tough matchup with 13 receptions and 101 yards with a touchdown. He was the wide receiver 5, his best game of the season. For weeks, Garrett Wilson absolutely reeked to high heaven, but last week, he really did look good. Let's see what happens, though. Will this shoot some juice into the team, or will losing Salah be a detriment to the team? I'm not going to sit here and overreact and crown Garrett Wilson as a clear top 12 wide receiver going forward after one game, but he should be a reliable wide receiver 2 this week. At least that's the hope that he is. Allen Lazard, the primetime merchant. I said it last week. He found the end zone in primetime in London. He has now scored in 3 straight primetime games, and guess what? This game is on Monday Night Football. When the games are played at 1 o'clock, he doesn't do diddly squat. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if he had a decent showing here, but with Garrett Wilson clearly being in the driver's seat now, with, in my opinion, the team looking to utilize the run game heavily against the Bills, Lazard is close to being a start, but I just simply won't do it. Mike Williams saw his highest amount of snaps played last week, but he really didn't see an elevation in terms of targets because he's stuck behind butt buddy of Aaron Rodgers, Allen Lazard. So I think Mike Williams is way better than Lazard, but Rodgers doesn't think that, so you got to leave Mike on the bench or on waivers. For the Buffalo Bills, Khalil Shakira is trending towards playing this week after missing last week in Houston with a high ankle injury that he suffered against the Ravens the week prior. I love Shakir and think he's the clear wide receiver 1 on this team, but against the Jumbo Jets, there is no need to play Shakir. Keon Coleman is yet to truly have a huge game. He has looked decent, though, but up against the Jets, I don't really feel like this is going to be his coming out party. And Curtis Samuel has done nothing this season, but as someone who has followed Curtis Samuel vehemently throughout his whole career, I know Curtis Samuel. He's going to magically, it might be this game, have like literally 30 fantasy points or 25 fantasy points, have a top 12 performance, but you'll never see it coming like John Cena, so you don't want to start him either. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. Make sure you check out one of the videos on your screen if you have not seen them already. And make sure you sign up to Underdog using promo code Notorious to claim your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I love you guys all so much. Thank you guys for 37,000 subscribers. Again, it means the world to me. Without you guys, the whole ship sinks. Have a great one, as always. Good boy.